Fighting beside humans was the most terrifying experience. The first thing Grax noticed was the smell. He had read the tactical profiles. He had studied human physiology, reviewed their military structure, and memorized the rank markings on their armor. He had prepared for this assignment the way any Velhari soldier prepared for anything, with complete information and zero surprises. The smell had not been in any report. It hit him at the gate of the forward operating base like a physical thing: fuel smoke, cooked food, something sharp and chemical, and underneath it all, the biological warmth of many bodies living in a small space. Grax stood at the entrance of the human camp, and his scales pulled tight against his arms. He held his data slate against his chest and walked in. The camp was prefabricated metal shelters set on gray dust ground beneath a sky the color of old bone. There was a portable lighting rig buzzing at the center. Two humans were arguing loudly near it, pointing at a container of food rations. One of them was laughing at the same time she was arguing. A third human sat in a folding chair nearby with full combat armor still strapped on, head tilted back, eyes shut, completely asleep. Not unconscious, asleep. The orbital threat alert was still flashing on the base's perimeter board. Grax stood still for 4 seconds. He was attempting to find the command hierarchy in the visual information around him. He could not find it. Somewhere in one of the shelters, someone was singing while repairing a weapon. Grax could hear the tool sounds and the song at the same time, in no apparent conflict with each other. He consulted his data slate. Sergeant Dara Owens, squad leader. He followed the camp's painted arrows to the operations shelter. She was sitting at a folding table with a mission map spread open in front of her. Compact, dark brown skin, close-cropped hair, olive green armor with a small hand-drawn symbol on the left shoulder plate. She looked up when Grax entered. She looked at him for exactly the length of time it took to confirm who he was. "Grax," she said, "you're in the second bunk." She looked back at her map. That was the entire greeting. Grax waited. He was not sure what he was waiting for. She did not ask about his journey. She did not offer context about the camp or the schedule or the team. She did not explain the mission. She simply continued reading the map as if he had always been there, and the map was more important than his arrival, which, he slowly realized, it probably was. He was not insulted. He was something else, something that did not have a clean word in the Velhari language. He found the second bunk. He set down his kit. He sat on the edge of the cot and opened his data slate and wrote. Initial observation: human command structure appears informal. Sergeant Owens demonstrates low social engagement consistent with high cognitive focus. Emotional noise at base level is significant but may be culturally performative. Hypothesis: the visible disorder is a surface layer. The functional structure beneath it is simply not visible to me yet. He believed this when he wrote it. He would later understand that he had been almost exactly wrong. The briefing came 2 hours later in the largest of the metal shelters. Dara stood at one end with a display board behind her. Grax sat along the wall. He counted 7 humans in the room. They sat in chairs or on crates or leaned against the walls. Nobody called the room to attention. Dara simply started speaking and everyone listened. The mission: Relay Station Orvith had fallen to the Ikari 4 weeks ago. It held encrypted command cores that were now behind enemy lines. The squad would go in, retrieve the cores, and come back out alive. One human asked how many Ikari were holding the station. Dara gave a number. Another human said that number was too many for their size unit, and a third one said something that Grax's translator rendered as, "We've walked into worse and come back with snacks," which could not possibly be accurate, but Grax left it in the log anyway. They accepted the mission without ceremony. There was no formal moment of acknowledgement, no ritual. One of them asked if they could eat first. Dara said yes. That was the end of the briefing. Grax stepped outside and opened his communicator. Commander Voss answered in 4 seconds. Assessment, Voss said. They are not what the profiles describe, Grax said. I will have more when I understand them better. A pause, that is not an assessment. No, Grax agreed, it is not. Voss closed the channel. That night Grax lay in the second bunk and could not sleep. Through the thin metal wall of the shelter he could hear the squad. Someone was telling a story and two others were laughing at it. Someone else was playing a stringed instrument badly, without apparent concern for this fact. There was no lowering of voices as the hour grew late. There was no preparation for the morning. Grax listened for fear. He could not find any. That was the moment it began. Not the unsettled feeling at the gate, not the confusion in Dara's shelter. This specific moment, lying in a dark bunk listening to humans laugh the night before a combat drop into enemy-held ruins, was the moment Grax first understood that something was deeply wrong with his understanding of what these creatures were. He opened his data slate in the dark and wrote by the dim glow of the screen. Observation 1, they are not preparing for death. They are preparing for the fight. I do not yet know if this is the same thing. The dropship entered Akari airspace, and the humans fell asleep. Not all of them, not Dara, but every other soldier in the squad, Bolo, Finn, Pitt, and the two others, simply closed their eyes within the first 20 minutes and stopped being conscious. They leaned against the hull, against each other, heads rolling slightly with the turbulence. Bolo had his mouth open. He was snoring. Grax sat rigid in his seat harness and stared at them. The ship was shaking. The engine noise was loud enough to feel in his chest. His tactical display was showing Akari patrol signatures less than 40 kilometers out. The threat was not theoretical. It was a specific number on a screen, closing slowly. And the humans were asleep. He looked at his display. He looked at Bolo's open mouth. He looked at his display again. There had to be a reason. He considered chemical, some compound in their food that induced rest cycles regardless of circumstance. He considered training, a conditioned response, sleep as discipline, the body ordered to conserve before expenditure. He considered that he was simply misreading the signals, and they were in some form of combat meditation he did not have a word for. He could not confirm any of these. He wrote nothing on his data slate. He had nothing useful to write. Dara was the only one awake. She sat across the bay with a small screen in her hands, reviewing the station schematics. Her face was completely still. She moved her finger across the display, paused, moved it again. She was not aware of the turbulence in any visible way. She looked up. She found Grax looking at the sleeping soldiers. "You should rest," she said. "I am monitoring the approach. You can do that rested." "I prefer." "You should still rest." She looked back at her screen. The conversation was over. Grax understood this because she had simply stopped responding, not rudely. She had said what she wanted to say and returned to what she was doing. The two things were not in conflict for her. He sat in silence. At some point, in the silence and the vibration and the engine noise, he almost understood something. It was a feeling more than a thought, the sense that the sleeping soldiers were not being careless, they were being efficient. That the calm was not the absence of preparation but was itself a form of it. That humans had learned, in some way Grax had not, that fear before the moment of need was simply wasted energy. He almost had it. Then the ship hit a hard shudder of turbulence and the feeling slipped away. The descent alarm sounded. Around Grax, every sleeping human opened their eyes. No confusion, no disorientation. They looked awake immediately, not slowly, not gradually. Awake. Bolo rolled his neck once, cracked his knuckles, and began checking his weapon. Pitt quietly counted his ammunition. Fenn tightened her medical kit straps without looking down at them. They did not need the alarm. They simply knew. Grax had no note for this either. The ramp dropped before the ship was fully down, and the world outside was fire and noise. Ikari ground emplacements had found them early. Pulse fire lit the rocky plateau in streaks of white-blue. Impact craters were still smoking from an earlier strike. The station ruins rose ahead, twisted and dark. A broken skeleton of metal and old signal arrays. Emergency lighting still flickering somewhere deep inside like a dying pulse. Grax processed this for 1.3 seconds. The humans were already gone. He was the last one down the ramp. He was not ashamed. He was still processing. Bolo moved in a low sprint toward the first cover point, taking fire the entire way, and he was laughing. Not quietly. Genuinely laughing, mouth open, the sound carrying even over the weapon's fire. Grax's translator offered nothing useful. The closest rendering it could manage was joyful aggression, which was a phrase that did not mean anything in practical terms. Grax filed it under abnormal behavior and kept running. They reached the station exterior and pushed through a breach in the outer wall. Inside, narrow corridors, low ceilings, smoke residue on every surface, damaged walls showing cut wiring and bent support struts, red emergency lighting, the smell of old circuitry and something burnt. The first obstacle was a collapsed section. The corridor was blocked, too narrow for anyone in full kit to fit through. Before Grax could open his route map, Fen had already stripped her chest armor and set it on the floor. She handed her medical kit to Bolo without a word. She got down and crawled into the gap. Grax looked at Dara. Did she calculate the risk? Dara looked at him. She calculated it was worth it. The door release clicked. The passage opened. Fen came back through the gap, accepted her kit from Bolo, and started reattaching her armor while walking. The whole thing had taken less than 90 seconds. They pushed into the outer ring of the station. Grax's scanner found Ikari signatures ahead, a small forward unit, 2 or 3 soldiers, scout formation. And something happened to the humans that he could not fully describe. There was no signal, no command. The laughing stopped. The casual posture stopped. Something colder moved into them, not anger, not fear, something that had no analog in his language, like watching a tool understand it was about to be used. Grax typed fast on his slate without slowing his stride. Observation 2, they have 2 modes. He had assumed the calm one was the dangerous one. He was wrong. The Ikari hit them from 3 directions at once. The main corridor was long and low-ceilinged, lit in failing red, with a burned-out equipment bay on the left and a row of collapsed wall sections on the right. Pulse fire came in synchronized bursts, high, low, center, the geometric precision of a species that had turned combat into architecture. Every shot was placed. Every burst answered the last. It was, Grax noted even as he pressed himself behind rubble, nearly perfect suppressive fire. Velhari tactical doctrine was clear. Hold position, identify the pattern, fall back to a defensible anchor point, and wait for the suppression rotation to open. He had run this scenario in training 41 times. The answer was always the same. We push forward, Dara said. My model shows 74% casualty probability, Grax said. He was not arguing. He wanted her to have the number. She looked at him once. That model doesn't account for what we're about to do. She moved. Grax did not immediately follow. He looked at his display. He looked at the corridor. He looked at the direction Dara had gone. Then he moved because there was nothing else to do. What happened next was not in any tactical file he had ever read. The squad did not organize. They did not assign roles or confirm positions over comms. They moved like a single body with 6 parts, each part already knowing what the others needed before anything was said. Fen went left without being told because Pitt was already going right and someone needed the left. Pitt went right because the angle from the right gave cover to Dara's center push, and somehow he had already known she would push center. Dara pushed center because both flanks were covered, and she knew they were covered without looking. Grax could not decode the communication that made this possible. They were speaking fragments, syllables, a hand movement, a look, but nothing that corresponded to any command structure he had ever studied. It was not language. It was something older than language. Then Bolo stood up. Not crouching, not at cover level. He stood fully upright in the middle of the corridor under active fire, spread his arms slightly and shouted at the Ikari position. He was laughing. The Ikari, presented with a standing target in the open, did the logical thing. They concentrated fire on him. Grax screamed into the comms. "Bolo, get down, Bolo, respond." Bolo did not respond. He was busy. Fen and Pitt came around the left flank while Bolo was still standing. 3 seconds. That was all it took. 3 Ikari soldiers were down before they could reorient. Bolo dropped behind cover the moment the flank connected, smooth as water, still grinning. The corridor was theirs. Grax ran the numbers. He ran them twice. He ran them a third time with modified inputs, adjusting for terrain advantages he might have missed. The math did not produce the outcome he was looking at. They should have taken 3 casualties at minimum. They had taken 0. He stood in the quiet of the taken corridor and felt something that was not a military feeling. It was something closer to the feeling he'd had as a young student when a lecturer showed him a proof that violated everything he had believed about a subject. Not fear, not awe, something between them that had no name. Dara moved through her soldiers. She touched each one on the shoulder as she passed, one hand, 2 seconds, firm. Not a gesture of comfort, something more specific than that. She paused at Fen for 3 seconds instead of 2. She paused at Pitt and her hand moved once across the back of his arm before she moved on. She was reading something. She was not reading it with her eyes. Grax watched her complete the circuit. Then she moved to him and put her hand on his shoulder the same way she had done it with the others. 2 seconds. Firm. She looked at him briefly and then moved on. He stood very still for a moment after she had passed. He approached her at the corridor junction, where she was reviewing the next route. "How did you know the flanking maneuver would work?" he asked. She considered the question, not dismissing it, actually considering it. "I didn't," she said. "Then why?" "I knew my people." She looked back at the route map. He could see she had already moved on in her mind. She was not being cryptic. She was telling him exactly as much as she knew, which happened to be something his training had never prepared him for. He thought about the 74%. He thought about Bolo standing upright under fire because the math said it would work, or not because the math said anything at all, but because Bolo had known where Fen was going, and Fen had known where Pitt was going, and Pitt had known and Dara had known, and somehow all of this knowledge had existed between them without anyone statting it. He typed slowly. Observation 3. Velhari soldiers are trained to trust the plan. Human soldiers are trained to trust each other. The difference is larger than he had calculated. The plan can be wrong. The people, it seems, are harder to be wrong about. The command core chamber smelled like burnt circuitry and old metal. It was the largest room they had entered, high ceiling, a catwalk running the length of it overhead, multiple doorways on 3 walls. The encrypted cores were exactly where the schematics said they would be. A stack of data cylinders against the far wall, each one glowing faintly blue, sealed in a lock frame. Grax looked at them from the doorway and felt briefly something like relief. The trap had already been set. They just did not know it yet. Dara sent Grax up to the catwalk for the retrieval. He was the only one with the Velhari extraction tool that could interface with the lock frame. The rest of the squad spread across the chamber floor and held positions. Pitt moved to the east doorway. Bolo took the south. Fen stayed center, watching both. Grax was 3/4 of the way across the catwalk when the Ikari came through 2 doors at once. The shot that hit Pitt came from the east doorway before anyone had time to process that the east doorway was now occupied. 1 round, high velocity, and Pitt went down. Not theatrically. He simply stopped being upright and became a different shape on the floor. For 1/2 second, the chamber was completely still. Then it was not. Fen crossed the floor at a speed that Grax's eyes had trouble tracking. She was on Pit with her kit open before the second round of Ikari fire had even found a target. She worked on him with her left hand. Her right hand came up with her weapon, and she fired back without turning her head, using the angle she already knew from the position she had already taken. She was humming, faintly under everything. Grax could hear it from the catwalk, the same quiet sound she made when she worked. It did not stop. The rest of the squad was already fighting. They had absorbed the ambush the way water absorbs something thrown into it, a disturbance, then closed. They did not freeze. They did not hesitate. The tightening Grax had felt in the corridor was back, but denser now, pulled tighter by something that had changed in the air when Pit fell. Grax stood on the catwalk with the extraction tool in his hands, and the lock frame 2 meters away. He did not move. It was not a decision. His body simply did not produce the movement. Below him was Ikari fire and his squad in contact, and Pit on the floor and Fen working on him, and the noise of a firefight in an enclosed space, which is very different from any other kind of noise. He stood there. Then Dara's voice came through his earpiece. Grax. One word, flat, quiet. Not urgent the way an alarm is urgent. Urgent the way gravity is urgent, simply a fact about the world that you cannot argue with. Move. He moved. His hands worked the lock frame. The extraction tool found the interface. He did not look down. He focused on the cylinders and the interface and the sound of the tool connecting and the blue glow of the cores as they released one by one into the carry case, and he did not look down. Below him, Fen said something in a low voice to Pit. Pit made a sound that meant he was alive. Then Fen was on her feet and back in the fight with the same continuous motion, blood on her hands that was not her own, kit closed and secured, weapon up. Dara's voice to the squad. Window closes in 6 minutes, we move. No vote, no question. She picked Pit up herself, his arm over her shoulder, her arm around his back, and started walking toward the exit corridor. Her pace did not look like someone carrying a grown soldier. It looked like someone walking with intention who happened to also be carrying a person. Bolo appeared beside her before they reached the doorway and took Pit with a smooth exchange. No words, no break in the movement. Dara was free and at the front again. The Ikari came through the rear doorway as they left. What the squad did next took 40 seconds. They used a section of collapsed ceiling that Pit had been leaning against before he was hit. Someone had already noticed it was unstable, and a personal movement beacon set to transmit a squad signal from the chamber. When the Ikari followed the beacon into the chamber, the ceiling came down. No one had said any of this aloud. Grax was the only one who looked back at the sound of the collapse. The squad was already moving. He understood, walking fast through the red-lit corridor with the carry case in his hands and Bolo ahead of him with Pit across his shoulders, that he had watched something happen today that he could not explain by any model he had been given. He typed one-handed, not slowing. Observation 4, they grieve while moving. They do not stop. The mourning happens somewhere inside them and it does not slow their feet. It may, in fact, be the thing that makes them faster. 8 minutes. That was the number on Grax's display when they reached the extraction point. The loading bay was wide and mostly empty, blast doors on the far wall open halfway to the rocky plateau outside, the dark sky visible through the gap, a faint orange glow from distant orbital activity. The cover in the bay was poor. 3 cargo containers on the left side, a row of dead equipment racks on the right. The floor was wide open in the center. The Ikari had reached the bay before them. They had 3 soldiers at the blast door, 2 more in the upper corners of the bay where old access hatches opened onto elevated ledges. 5 total. The position was technically well chosen. The dropship was 8 minutes out. Grax ran the calculation in 4 seconds. This position is not survivable, he said to Dara. He was not catastrophizing. He was giving her the data. She looked at the bay. She looked at the Akari positions. She looked at the sky through the blast door gap. 8 minutes is a long time, she said. Grax opened his mouth. He closed it. He filed the statement under things he would have to process later and raised his weapon. What followed was the most concentrated 8 minutes of Grax's life. The humans did not organize. They moved into the bay the way liquid moves into a space, filling it, finding the angles, covering each other without instructions. Bolo went right immediately because Fen went left, and Pit, being carried but still functional, still present, was positioned behind a container and handed a weapon by Dara in the same motion she used to move him there. Grax went to the nearest cover point, which happened to be beside Dara, and he stayed there because she was there, and being near her felt, in that moment, like the most logical tactical decision he had ever made. The Akari pushed hard. Their fire was precise, correct angles, correct suppression timing, textbook application of force against a smaller unit. If Grax had been studying their tactics in an academic setting, he would have graded the execution highly. They were doing everything right. They kept expecting the squad to fall back. He could see it in the geometry of their fire, pushing harder on one side than the other, creating an open corridor toward the rear of the bay, expecting the humans to take the offered escape. The humans did not take it. They pushed back into the heavier fire and sealed the corridor, and the Akari had to recalculate. They recalculated. They pushed a different angle. The humans sealed that one too. At some point, Grax stopped being an observer. He did not decide to stop. He was beside Dara and she moved left, and he moved with her because it was the right angle, and then he was firing and the Akari position on the left elevated hatch was down, and Dara looked at him. She gave him one nod. It was very small, 2 seconds at most. Then she looked back at the fight, but he felt it like something physical, like the shoulder touch in the corridor, like a signal in a language he was only just beginning to read. He filed it somewhere that was not his data slate. 5 minutes in, Bolo was bleeding from a graze on his neck. Not badly, enough to be obvious. Fen called across the bay in a normal voice, and Bolo called back that he was fine, and Fen said something that Grax's translator rendered as, "I know that, I asked anyway," and then they were both firing again. At the 6-minute mark there was a lull. Brief, 30 seconds, while the Akari repositioned to their third angle. Bolo stood up. Not for tactical reason. He stood up fully in the open bay, with blood dried on his neck and his weapon held loosely at his side, and he shouted something at the Akari across the bay. His voice was loud and cheerful. The translator worked for several seconds and then produced anatomical insult, nonspecific, delivered with apparent enthusiasm. Grax stared at him. The Akari did not fire. They did not fire for 4 seconds. Grax counted. He had never seen Akari hesitate. They did not hesitate in his training files. They did not hesitate in any engagement record he had ever read. They processed, decided, and acted. They were fast and they were certain. They were not certain right now. They were looking at something their models had not included: a wounded soldier, low cover available, 30 seconds of quiet, and the human's response was to stand up and shout insults while grinning. There was no tactical behavior file that ended this way. Their certainty, built on the assumption that all units in sustained contact eventually break, had just hit something that was not breaking. The dropship came through the gap in the blast doors in the 7th minute, engines loud and immediate and close, and the Akari fell back. They fell back still looking at Bolo. He waved at them. He actually waved. Grax got on the ship. He sat in his harness. He looked at his data slate. He looked at it for a long time before he wrote anything. Observation 5. The Akari fought perfectly. The humans fought as if they had already decided to win. These are not the same thing. The first is a method. The second is something I do not have a word for yet. The medbay of the extraction vessel was white and quiet. Grax sat on a cot near the wall and did not move. He was not injured. He had checked this himself and the ship's medical scanner had confirmed it. He simply sat. His data slate was open on his knee. The report document for Commander Voss was open on the screen. The cursor blinked. He had written nothing. Pitt was in the cot across from him, sedated, chest rising and falling with the steady patience of someone whose body had made an agreement with time. A machine beside him tracked his pulse in small orange lines. Fen was asleep in the chair beside his cot, still in her field kit, head tilted to one side, hands still in her lap. She had stayed awake long enough to confirm Pitt's status, and then she was simply gone, asleep in the chair the same way the soldiers had been asleep on the dropship, completely, without ceremony. Bolo was eating from a ration pack at the small table in the corner. He was giving it his full concentration, the same focus he gave everything, apparently including meals. He had a fresh adhesive bandage on his neck. He had not mentioned the injury since Fen patched it. Dara was at the desk on the far wall, writing her after-action report. Her posture was the same as it had been at the folding table in the forward operating base, straight, still, fully present. She wrote as if the writing were a mission. It probably was. Grax looked at his blank document. He had enough material for 20 reports. He had observations 1 through 5 on the data slate. He had field notes, behavioral data, timing records, tactical analyses, and 3 separate instances where human action had produced outcomes his models said were impossible. He had more data than he had ever gathered on a single operation. He did not know how to begin. Commander Voss contacted him 11 minutes into the flight, ahead of schedule. His voice came through the earpiece clipped and exact. "The cores are confirmed high value," Voss said. "Command is pleased. Your assessment are humans' viable combat assets." Grax looked across the medbay. He looked at Pitt's steady pulse line, at Fen asleep in her chair with blood still on her hands from the work she had done, at Bolo who had stood up in an active combat zone to shout insults at the enemy while bleeding and grinning, at Dara writing her report with the same calm she brought to everything, the same calm that had said 8 minutes is a long time and been correct. He thought about Bolo laughing in the fire on the landing. He thought about Fen crawling through a collapsed corridor without armor because she calculated it was worth it. He thought about the 40-second ambush assembled from debris and a personal beacon by people who had never discussed it aloud. He thought about the shoulder touch. He thought about the nod. He typed the first line of his report and read it back to Voss. "Do not send Velhari soldiers into combat alongside humans without extensive preparation." Voss was briefly, audibly satisfied. "Confirmed. I will note your recommendation." "I am not finished," Grax said. He kept writing. The full report took 9 minutes. When Voss finished reading it, he was quiet for a long time. That was unusual. Voss was not a quiet person. "This is not a negative assessment," Voss said finally. "No," Grax said, "it is not. You are recommending we expand the joint program." "I am recommending we understand what we are working with before we attempt to direct it," Grax said. "They are not a tool. They are not a weapon. They are something that has decided to be on our side, and we should be careful not to confuse that with obedience." Another silence. "That is an unusual thing to put in an operational report," Voss said. "It is an unusual thing to have observed," Grax said. The channel closed. He sat for a while longer. The cursor still blinked on the document. He had not written the last line yet. He was thinking about what it should say. Dara came across the medbay and stopped beside his cot. She looked at him the way she always looked at him, direct, brief, gathering information. "Injured?" she asked. "No." She sat beside him anyway, not close, just present. The same way she had been present at the folding table at the corridor junction in the bay with fire coming from two angles, simply there without announcement. They sat in the white quiet for a while. Bolo finished his food. The pulse machine continued its orange lines. Somewhere in the ship, something mechanical made a low, steady sound. "You going to request a different assignment?" Dara asked. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the middle distance the way she looked at maps. He thought about it honestly. He thought about every moment since the gate of the forward operating base. The smell, the noise, the chaos that was not chaos, the sleeping soldiers, the 40 seconds, the nod. "No," he said. She nodded once, stood up, and walked back to her desk and her report. Grax looked at the blank line at the bottom of his document. He wrote, "Observation 6, I was afraid of them before the mission. I am more afraid of them now. The difference is that now I understand what the fear actually is. It is not the fear of something dangerous. It is the fear of something that chooses. And they have chosen, for reasons I may never fully understand, to let me stand beside them. I would not trade that for any safer assignment in the known galaxy.